Hello everyone, I'm Burnham, CEO of Stilo, and welcome to today's presentation on sharing content across the enterprise. I wonder if we could just get the first slide up, please, Amber. Thank you. So I think for those that's been working within structured content for some time, the business case for content reuse within tech docs has typically been a major driving force for DITA adoption, and of itself actually presents significant implementation challenges. But what about stepping outside of tech docs and sharing content across the enterprise? Are there good use cases to support such initiatives? How easy or difficult is it to share content across the enterprise? So in today's presentation, Amber will talk about strategies that will hopefully help you create and share the right content across your organizations. But before introducing Amber, let me begin by providing a brief overview of Stilo for those of you who don't already know us. We're a public company listed on London Stock Exchange. We have offices in the UK and in Ottawa. And we basically provide tools and services that can be used to build custom solutions. So we have OmniMark, which is a development language. We have Migrate, which is a cloud conversion service. And we have AuthorBridge, which is a XML authoring tool for subject matter experts. And we deal with a range of industries across a whole range of sectors. And we've been working with DITA really from the get-go for more than 10 years. And now let me introduce Amber. For those of you who don't already know her, Amber is president and founder of DITA Strategies, which is one of the leading consultancies in our industry. And really, as a much respected information architect, she's helped many organizations address a range of content issues over the last 20 years or so. So as well as being an accomplished speaker, she co-authored DITA Maturity Model and is the author of numerous articles and white papers. And what it doesn't say on this slide is that Amber's a keen footballer, I should say soccer fan, and still regularly plays 11 aside at weekends. And for any of you that have a run around a football pitch for 90 minutes, you'll appreciate just how physically exhausting and challenging that can be. But now to addressing content challenges, and over to you, Amber.
Up season, and I have to tell you, it's very distracting right now to try and do work, but we're going to talk about content and not about soccer. So really quickly, DITA Strategies works with companies from a variety of industries to help them implement DITA. As you can see from this list, that DITA can be used in many different ways, and if you have questions about that, please contact me. Send me an email, check out our website, but I'm going to move on. So content collections, I'm talking about a collaborative approach to content creation. So why am I even talking to you about this? Well, because a lot of organizations have these common challenges. The first is that you're hunting for information. You have difficulty finding reusable content when you can find content. And then if you want to share that information with others, it is not easy to do so. So I want to understand a little bit about how these challenges are affecting you, the folks who are attending the webinar. And my experience is that the larger the organization, the more repositories that you have to investigate in order to find the information that you want. And I'm curious to see if that's holding up as anecdotal evidence, or if you are on one of the miracle ones that you only have to go one place to find what you need. So we have the poll. If you could respond, that would be awesome. All right, so the poll has ended, and most folks answered B, which is 2 to 3. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot, except when you're trying to get work done, you don't want it to be that you're going through and looking for information. You want to be, finding the information that you need. And if you have to go to multiple repositories, that will not be easy. I think that the key to having shareable or reusable content is for it to be structured as well as stored in a place that you can find it. And what I mean by structured is that it's consistent, that it's validated, that it's identified, and that it's tracked. And what I mean by the consistency isn't that you just have the same words necessarily or you follow your corporate style guide, but that the structure itself is consistent. That if I go and find a conceptual topic, that I know what I'm going to get when I open it up. That if you're using DITA, that it's valid XML against the DTDs that you are using in your implementation, that it's uniquely identified so that I have a sense of, oh, if there are two pieces of content that are very similar, which one is each so that I can compare? And the last is that it is tracked. And what this means is that if there are multiple versions of this topic, that I can understand, first of all, what the number of versions that there are, and then I could easily then identify what's changed between them. I love all of the toys on this slide. I grew up with the toys on this slide. They are all fabulous, but if you've ever tried to build something with all of these toys in this slide, it doesn't work, which is why Lego now rules supreme. And I love this analogy of Legos as the building blocks of structured content, because no matter what the piece size is in Lego, the pieces go together because they have a standard structure for the way that they interconnect. You could go purchase the pirate ship model or the Millennium Falcon model, and those pieces would actually be able to, go together in, you'd be able to put them together. You might end up with a really ugly hybrid of a pirate ship and the Millennium Falcon, but they would physically lock together. And you are able to reuse these pieces, and if I have a collection of Legos and you have a collection of Legos, if we pulled them together, they would actually work. I'm seeing a message that something is blocking a bit of the slide, and I don't know if that's something I can address or not. One of the other challenges is when we go and find things, even if we know where to look, if things are in the multiple repositories, if you don't have single sign-on, it doesn't do you any good to know that that's where it is if you can't get into it. A lot of companies are implementing single sign-on. That's awesome. But this is one of the big barriers is having physical access to information in these different systems. What we want is something that looks more like this. And again, the information architect in me loves the look of this. It's so easy to see. I can go in, I can see, oh, what color is the paper? What size is it? And I can get what I need and get out of that closet really fast. I'm not in there hunting around and, digging through piles. It's super clear what is in this storeroom. And that is how we want your content to be, that folks, first of all, they can physically access it, but when they get there, they don't have to been the person to have created it in order to use it. And that's one of the big barriers to sharing content is that folks, if they don't create it, they don't trust it, they don't know to use it. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what I refer to as content collections. And what I mean by this is that we want to have information that we bring together either in a physical location or in virtual locations as collections, and that they're planned and maintained. So here's my definition of a content collection. It's a collection of organized, labeled, source content units that are available to the appropriate people. Notice it doesn't say everybody, because not everybody should have access to everything. A lot of organizations have a lot of challenges around security. If you are a global enterprise, there are federal rules and regulations around some countries and locales about what types of information they might have access to. If you're a small company, it may simply be that you want to have some folks who are able to create content and some folks who are only able to view it and reuse it, and that if they need a change, that you go through a change process with them rather than having everybody have edit rights to your collection. So when I think about a collection, I don't think about just the content one group creates. So a lot of folks, when they think about DITA or any type of structured content, they first think about technical publications. But if you think about the content that's available for your company, what percentage of it does TechPubs actually create? I have seen in my experience that it's a fairly minimal amount. There are lots of other people who are creating valuable content, and a lot of times similar or related content to what is being produced by technical publications. And in this slide, I put out some of the more common folks that I see doing this. Professional services. In professional services, I'm thinking about folks that go out to service a product. It could be that they are doing configuration. They could be doing service and maintenance. This is a group that is customer facing and has a lot of interaction with your client base. Education services. If you have any type of learning, whether it be knowledge transfer to formal certification programs, these folks are creating content. And a lot of times that content either copies and pastes or mirrors the content that is being produced by these other groups, including TechPubs. Marketing. With marketing, there is overlap with TechPubs in different types of content that I'll go into, but they also have unique content that you might not see somewhere else, but we should be able to leverage that shared content when available. And lastly on this slide is customer support. Particularly the act of troubleshooting. Many times troubleshooting an error or an error state actually walks the user through many of the same tasks that are already documented by TechPubs. And when I think about content, I think about it in this greater ecosystem, this idea of a collection. And I look at this and I say, oh, well, you know, in most organizations, how many tools are we looking at here? Well, in a lot of them, we're looking at 5 different repositories, 5 different ways to create content. If you want to be able to become more efficient, build higher quality deliverables, you have to be able to work together to build a collection of content that is available when you need it. All right, so we had our second poll. So in your organization, in this example, I'm asking about for a specific product, how many folks are creating content that are being released out to your customers? Or maybe it's internal customers versus external customers. These are just a sample of the types of organizations. I'm sure that you may have others as well. And again, what I mean by education services, this could be internal education folks or that, for instance, train new employees on your technology or your products, or this could be, for instance, a certification program for your clients or partners. All right. So I'm seeing the poll results as they're coming in, and it looks like we have a fair number of folks who are saying TechPubs. Not very many people who are saying that education services is creating content. Marketing is and customer support are tie as the next highest content creators, and professional services is falling right below that. So I'll be honest, that was a little surprising to me. I suspect that your education services groups are creating this content, you just might not know about it, or perhaps it's not a formal group in your organization. All right. So what would it look like if these organizations were trying to share content? Well, first of all, I use the term share rather than reuse purposefully. I believe that it's important to think about it as an act of everyone contributing and then everyone having appropriate access. That is very different than I think of the idea of reuse, where I throw something into the pot and I walk away. And to me, there's a big distinction there, and one of them is much more collaborative, and that's what we're going to talk about. So let's start from the top. If you have professional services, what kind of content do they write that is unique to them? Well, they probably have the best practices. They, a lot of times, have great process documentation, and they're following a specific methodology so they get reproducible results. Now, those processes probably reuse the tasks that are coming out of tech pubs. Why should they be rewriting these if you could find a way to say, okay, what belongs in a task? What information needs to be here? Oh, professional services, do you need some information that is only available to you? Well, if so, let's figure out where it happens in your workflow, and let's figure out how we identify it so that that information is only visible to, for instance, a professional services consultant and not to an end user. Marketing. Marketing content is a lot of times considered to be the only pre-sales content, and that's not necessarily the case. I had a client that they actually tracked the clicks on their website, and they found that 60% of their prospective clients or customers checked the TechPub's documentation as well as the marketing information prior to making a purchase. And when the data specifications did not match between the documentation and the marketing brochure, guess what? Wah, wah, no sale. So this is where you can look at it and say, oh, well, what can we share? Well, we could probably share the data specifications. However, features, benefits, those are pretty much only applicable to the marketing folks, and they should own this. This is where they add their value. Perhaps potentially you guys could share the product descriptions as well as maybe some concepts and probably some pictures, but the point here is that each of these organizations should contribute what they do best and leverage what others do best. So we get to tech pubs. This is where we see that classic product documentation paradigm as one of the options. Task, concept, reference, data specifications. Maybe these are the folks who put in the glossary items so that everyone else can use them. Then you head over to customer support. These are the folks who are actually interfacing with your customers when something goes awry, when the product did not perform as expected, or maybe there's user error, and they call for help. And by call, I mean it could be a chat bot, it could be an email, it could be a self-service, a troubleshooting app. What the customer support folks bring to this picture is they take a lot of the same information that other groups, maybe tech pubs, have written, and they put it in a different context. They say, oh, in the context of addressing this error message, you perform these tasks. And the same with troubleshooting, particularly if you want to do any type of a self-guided troubleshooting or leverage chatbots, you're going to want to talk to each other and say, oh, what content do you need? And do we need to have specific IDs at different levels other than maybe only at the topic level? This is why it is a collaboration and not simply a dump in the bucket exercise. Lastly, we have the folks who create educational materials. Now, if any of you are instructional designers or have taken a course recently, you will know that the classic instructional design is we're going to tell you what you're going to learn, we're going to have you learn it, and then we're going to tell you what you learned. And that is classic, and that's great. Well, that means that those learning objectives are purely in the domain of the educational folks. Tech Pubs is probably never going to use those, and that's fine. That's not what they need them for. However, as the instructional designers are building the modules for their courses, perhaps they can reuse some of the concepts, the UI reference, the data specs, the definitions, and perhaps there is the expectation that they can present the general task and then present the corresponding exercise that walks the learner through how to perform the task with the samples. And then, of course, there is assessment if you are doing a more formal training experience, and that, of course, would also be the purview of the instructional domain. But taken together, if you look at this, this is a pretty complete look at all the content that many products need in order to fully support both their internal and external customers. So let's talk about what it would take, what are the characteristics of content to be able to be shared by all those people. Well, the first thing is it has to be modular. You cannot share 20-page documents and say, oh, hey, I'm putting in this 20-page document, you want to reuse it? That's not how that works, particularly if you can use something like a DITA, where you have these discrete modular units that are typed. It goes a long way to giving you those plug-and-play Lego blocks to say, oh, if you go in here and it's a concept, we know what we're going to find. If we go into a task, we know we're going to find one set of steps. And maybe you negotiate with all the folks in your ecosystem to say, oh, and we're going to make sure that all the parts and supplies or safety information that a given task needs will always be presented in this portion of the task topic, and there will be a fully standalone unit. Metadata. When you burst apart your content in these modular units, how do you bring it back together again? And I tell you that the backbone to this is metadata. It doesn't have to be a full-blown taxonomy. A lot of folks simply don't have that type of resource, but agree on some basic metadata. If you want to say we're going to have a product collection, a content collection around a specific product, well, then you have to be able to identify which units apply to which product. It's pretty obvious. It has to be designed. And what I mean by that is it can't be that that folks just throw in whatever they want. There has to be agreement on, okay, reference topic will have this structure. Glossary topics, are we going to use the abbreviations elements for all things that are short forms, or are we going to go through and make a differentiation between acronyms, short forms, abbreviations, etc. You have to think about what is the need of the content for all the stakeholders and then work together to come up with a common set of guidelines so that everyone, regardless of who contributes it, contributes content that can be shared by all. It has to be managed. You can't just go in and expect to share content if you have no idea what you're getting, what version it is, how current it is, who touched it last, is it in a release state or is it in draft state, is it under active development? And this is where wikis have failed folks. I love wikis for some uses, but I have to say for sharing content, not so much, because they tend to just spawn multiple instances of content, and then you go in and you can't ever figure out which one was the most recent piece of content, which tells me then which is the most valuable piece of content. Lastly, it has to be maintained. When you go in and you look at content and it hasn't been touched for 2 years, well, maybe you think, oh, well, this is old and out of date. Well, if it's foundational information about a legacy product, that's probably okay. But if it's about a product that you know is under active development and it hasn't been updated, well, then it means that it hasn't been maintained, and that means that you are not going to share that content. You're not going to use that content. So in order to have a content collection, you have to have some rules of the road or a framework for making this work. And the first thing is you have to all identify the requirements. You have to decide what the scope of the collection is actually going to be, and you've got to figure out how you're going to collaborate with others. So when you identify the requirements, the first thing you have to think about is who really are the stakeholders in this endeavor. You may say, well, we're not going to go and try and get 5 groups to talk to each other all at once if you have no way of communicating with each other and you're in a highly siloed environment. You may say, oh, well, we're going to go and talk to the stakeholders that have the most to benefit and figure out who they are. You're going to have to identify what content types you need. This means going through and looking and doing an audit of your content, all the content that you guys want to share, and saying, okay, I see that we have this same information is presented slightly differently. Can we standardize and say, oh, this is going to be a frequently asked questions, or it's going to be troubleshooting? Okay, let's negotiate that and talk about what it means to say, in order to build X deliverable for this part of the website or for this EPUB or for this help system or this course, we have to know exactly what we're building. What scenarios are you going to support? The reality is that we should be building process or task-based or use case-based information. The bad old days where we just documented all the UI screens and said, oh, here's an alphabetized list of those, are gone. Content consumers expect you to present the information based on what they are trying to achieve, not what you built them. So the good news is that if you are doing any type of user-centric design for your products, that these use cases or scenarios should be available to you and as part of the development process, and that you could say, hey, this release has these 5 key scenarios. Let's look at this together and say, oh, what information is required through purchasing, using, maybe getting started, maybe getting some training, maybe recovering from an unexpected event. What are those scenarios that we need to support, and how do we work together to make that happen? That next is the required metadata. We do not need to have all the metadata in the world, right? We only need the metadata that's going to support said scenarios from the previous bullet point. Remember, metadata is only as good as it is consistently applied. If you have different metadata values, so one person says prod A and the other person says product A, when you try and find information or try to send it out for a great customer experience, it's not going to happen. So think small, start small. Start with, an Excel spreadsheet and say, okay, here's what here's what we need. We're all going to call it this. And let's agree on a basic classification. Maybe it's product family, okay. And then, all right, let's make sure that we're using the same names. That sounds so simple, but let me tell you, many of the companies I've worked at and worked with have a very hard time getting even product and product family defined because of the flexibility potentially of their delivery, or the fact that maybe your company grew through acquisition and what was a product for one group is a solution for another. And so I encourage you to not shy away from this conversation, but go in prepared that it could take some time for something as what you think is obvious as your products. Workflow. Oh my goodness, I can't tell you how important this is. What is the workflow? If you're going to share information, do you only care about it if it's released? Do you need to know that it's been legally reviewed, or that safety's reviewed it, or that it's gone through some other quality gate? You don't have to have a CMS to have workflow. You can do it through process. If you do have a CMS, well, then a lot of them have configurable workflow. And my my highest recommendation is start simple with your workflow. Even if you're doing it in a spreadsheet, if all you need is draft and released, that's awesome. Well, most folks probably need some type of a validation in there, such as technical review. If you're in a regulated industry, you know I'm talking about something completely different, and your workflow is going to be a lot more formal, but you probably already agreed upon it because it's so foundational to the ability for you to release a product. Last but not least is quality. What does quality mean? Is it, more than accuracy? Well, I should hope so. Is it consistency? It'd be nice. I was working with a client where the learning folks were trying to collaborate with the Tech Pubs folks, and the learning folks were questioning, well, why does it take you so long to get content out the door? So the Tech Pub folks walked through their scenario, their workflow, and part of it is being able to prove that they have 508 compliance, which is the accessibility for folks that are visually impaired. And the learning folks said, we don't have to do that. Okay, well, if one group is required to have 508 compliance and the other is not, then you're going to have a disconnect and they will not be able to share content. So that definition of quality is incredibly important, and do not assume. Actually ask them, what is it that makes your content to be considered done and of the quality level that customers expect? Next is determining the scope. There's this old saying that great fences make great neighbors, right? Well, I like this picture because it's very clear where these fields are ending, but it's still a beautiful picture and it's still very organized. So what's the scope of this exercise going to be? Are you going to do it to say, okay, maybe we have 5 different business units, but all the folks in Tech Pubs are going to try and share content? Or are you going to say, oh, well, these 2 organizations, we're going to try and share content based upon the fact that we both support the same product or product family? I've seen other folks take a different approach and say, it doesn't matter which product or product family or organization created the content, we're going to focus on this very specific customer role. For instance, the server administrator. We're going to make sure that that person has all the information they need. Or it could be by industry. Maybe you have a product or product lines or products and product lines that are built into solutions and that serve a specific industry. Well, the reality is not that your customers, you have business incentives that you say, oh, this is the area where we want to make an initiative this year. Well, maybe that's how you organize to say, oh, okay, if you're trying to support folks in insurance, let's make sure that we know fully what content and what success looks like for people in the insurance industry, and let's make sure that all the content that all of us contribute really meets their needs and just gives them an awesome user experience. So we're at our 3rd poll, and I know we just talked about this, but if you were to try and build a content collection, what kind of collection do you think would be the most useful for your organization or for your company? Is it by org, where you say, oh, it's Tech Pubs and maybe training, or Tech Pubs and customer support? Or do you think that you could have a broader base and say, oh, if we focus on awesome support for a specific product or a specific customer role or a specific industry served, that we could find common ground much more easily than if we said, oh, it's from this organization versus that one. And while the poll's happening, let me just tell you, one of the things that drives me bananas as a content consumer is when I go to a website and it surfaces your internal organization. I go there and you expect me to know the information that I need, first of all, and then I have to know, did training create it? Did tech support create it? Is it in the documentation? As a user, I do not care who created it as long as it is accurate and I can trust it. And you better make it easy for me to find. So I'm a big fan of reaching across organizations so that we have a better user experience. All right, so wow, 100% they think by customer role. That is unexpected but awesome, because we want our content to meet the needs of specific customers and customer roles. So if your company is focused to say, oh, okay, we have these very different roles, what information do they need? Then this is the framework that you can start these negotiations to start figuring out, oh, what kind of content does this customer need? And are we creating all of it? My experience is that you'll find that you're creating 85% of it, and 20% of that will be duplicated or redundant or incredibly similar and could be standardized or harmonized. Coordinating. So let's say that you get with the right folks. You all agree that this is the customer role you're going to support. And you say, okay, we know what content types we need. We know what scenarios this user is trying to perform. We understand what the design should be. Awesome. But you're still not done, because just because you've agreed on the principles, we don't have action yet. So let's start with the first one, which is permissions. Ideally, you would be able to have all your content in the same repository. I don't know about you, but I don't live in an ideal world. This means that a lot of times the content will be coming from different repositories. In some cases, that's planned. So for instance, if you have a product that requires a lot of images or multimedia files, that you might have a digital asset management system in addition to a content repository. You might be working with a parts database. There are all kinds of reasons to have specific repositories for content. The question is, who should have permission to them, and how do you manage that? Well, a lot of times folks will say, well, rather than having everyone have permissions to all these systems, well, we'll say, okay, these are the folks that should have permissions to the CMS, the content management system, and we'll build a bridge between the digital asset management system so that the files that the folks need are available to them in the CMS, and that way we don't have to worry about having people having permissions to different systems. Another great technological advancement is the advent of single sign-on, and I'm seeing a lot more companies do that. So ideally, in 5 years, I won't have to have permissions on this slide. So, and also by permissions, what I mean is by role. I mean, not everybody should have access to the ability to see everything or to touch everything. So access actually is more what I was referring to before with having an account to get in. Then permissions would be, oh, it's Amber. She's logged into the CMS. She can see most things. She can create some things. She can edit some things. But there's some stuff that I should never know about. Again, workflow. If you're going to have a single system, you have to figure out the workflow. Well, what if you're in multiple systems? At what point do things leave one system and move to another? Ideally, you'd be able to handle this with workflow and make this a pattern-based operation. We don't want to ever wonder at work. I'm a big fan of wondering why the sky is blue and things that are unrelated. But at work, I don't want to wonder. I want to have confidence that if I go and access something, that I know what I'm getting, I know what state it's in, I know who touched it last, I know if it's been technically validated. I don't want to wonder, because no one wants surprises at work, right? Unless they're cake or money. But we want to have workflow manage our expectations of what we get and where. The storage. This is important because we have to say, first of all, how many systems are appropriate. If you're in a situation where your company has grown through acquisition. I can guarantee you that you have multiple systems that do all kinds of things. And that might be okay. There may be a business reason to maintain them as separate storage repositories. On the other hand, there may be a business imperative to consolidate and bring this information together. This is a labor-intensive process, but you're never going to get there unless you start coordinating and talking about where everything lives and why it lives where it does. Then we get to publishing. You know, in the old days, we used to create manuals, and we used to create them in the tools that we, built them in, and we'd publish them and then, download a PDF and send it on its way. Well, the world has changed, particularly with mobile devices. Folks don't want big PDFs. They want smaller units of content. They want interactive units of content. They want to be able to personalize their experience. And in order to publish to that environment, you have to think about, well, what gets built when you publish? So, in its most simple, doing a save as from Word to PDF is a publishing action. If you were an XML, you would run a transform. That's the act of publishing. Well, there's a lot of situations now in these delivery systems where what you publish isn't the final deliverable, but rather you publish a collection of files with metadata on them that can then be served by a web server or some other delivery mechanism, and they publish again, essentially. This is a great conversation to have with your UX folks. Start with them and start working your way back from what the user gets to figuring out how many different ways you're publishing, how many different times you're publishing the same content, how many instances of it are leaving your system, because remember, every instance that leaves needs to be updated the next time that content changes. So the more you can streamline publishing, the better off you are. Last but not least is governance. Now, a lot of folks think of the G word as a bad word, and I know it starts off with govern, which sounds so heavy-handed. I would love for folks to reframe governance in their heads to think of it as a collaboration forum. Rather than having to go and talk to somebody only when something bad has happened, what if you had a forum where you met regularly and you had a great rapport and you said, oh, okay, well, here's what we're doing. Oh, TechPubs is having an initiative to implement a more consistent style and maybe we're doing more minimalism. Oh, okay, everyone else should, what's that do to your content? How can you embrace that? Oh, we need some new metadata because we have a new user role, or we've expanded to a new locale and we need to identify that. Governance is the chance for you guys to collaborate and come to agreement on what should happen. And for me, that is not a one and done. It's not a effort that should only happen when things go wrong. It should be a regular conversation with all the folks who are participating in the collection to make sure that you're all contributing what everyone else needs and what you need, and that what you're getting out of it, what you need. So I challenge you that if you don't like the G word, to really reframe that as a definition to a collaboration forum. So in summary, I want to go back to sharing content is more than reuse. It is not simply that I put something in and if somebody else uses it, well, that's just fine. No, I want you to think about, oh, we're going to use this together. How do we all contribute to the greater good of, in what the poll told me, into serving each customer role to the best of our ability? The other takeaway is this does not happen by accident. It takes work. And one of the things I kind of joke about is it would be so much easier if people weren't involved, right? Because first of all, you have to find them. And then you have to interrupt their work to say, hey, I think there's some value in us working together. And meanwhile, they're trying to get through a deadline. They are having technical issues. They're not getting the information they need. So it doesn't resonate with them that this is a good thing. And so it takes work to say, this is beneficial to all of us. Let's work together to make sure our customers get the best experience. And that, in some organizations is really hard. It might be hard because you're in different physical locales. It might be hard because of politics, because that's what happens. And that is not limited to big companies, by the way. I've actually seen some highly politically charged situations in tiny companies. But it's worth the effort. And the other thing is that this should be pattern-based. Remember, I'm talking about workflow should be pattern-based. Metadata should be pattern-based. Publishing should be pattern-based. The sharing should also be pattern-based, that you can say, oh, for X customer role, these are the use cases, and we know that in order for them to buy the product, they need this information, and marketing contributes 80% of it, and the rest of it's already in the collection because TechPubs might have contributed. Oh, they're setting up the product? Oh, okay, well, TechPubs has provided most of this, but maybe there's some process information that was contributed by professional services. Oh, they're having a challenge. Well, that means that they need to have information available for situational recovery. Oh, well, then tech support might be providing the context, but they might be reusing content from these other groups. This should not be a random act. This should be pattern-based, and that means that you need to do some really good information architecture exercises and use that exercise as a framework for understanding how these patterns are created and how they serve your users. So that is the end of my prepared remarks. I was hoping that maybe some folks would have some questions.
Thanks, Amber. Whilst people are thinking about that, I've got a couple I'd like to ask, if I may. And I was thinking about your comment here about it doesn't happen by accident. What you've presented here is all really good stuff, and it's very hard to argue against it. I wondered, from your point of view, what you see as the sort of the biggest inhibitors to making this sort of thing happen in organizations.
Structures, organizational structures, and deadlines. The reality is that a lot of companies are still running lean and mean, and your manager wants you to focus on meeting your deadlines because that's what they and you get evaluated on when it comes to your annual review.
Yeah,
you have to help people find that reason and the customer experience as the common goal. A lot of organizations just operate so independently that there isn't a stated common goal for folks to rally around.
Yeah. So in that case, do you think it's it's a matter of having this really sort of directed from the top to bring people together? Because I'm trying to think, well, who is going to initiate this process? So do you get someone in tech docs who is corporately spirited and minded and will reach out to people? Or do you think, well, that's just a bit ad hoc? You would think for this sort of initiative to be really effective, it would have to come from a top down. I mean, is that what you're saying?
Well, no, I think it can come from the top down or bottom up, or ideally from both directions. Where if, for instance, if something comes out of tech support where they see a 20% spike in calls around a specific user scenario, well, there's one thing that we can all rally around and say, oh, well, what if we had better information in the help system? What if we had better information in other places, not just in the knowledge base for tech support? To me, that's a grassroots effort.
Yes.
Sometimes there's a window of opportunity when, for instance, your company is moving into a new industry, or they're releasing a new product, that there is a focus on user experience. Ideally, it would happen all the time, but let's be honest, sometimes it's only at these intervals. Well, at that point, it's a top-down exercise because everyone's saying, all right, we're going to go for this new market, blah, blah, blah. Okay, how do we all get on board and talk to each other? And I think that that's a top-down way to get this ball rolling.
Yes, I mean, I guess in our own experience, we've seen sort of initiatives being driven typically by marketing or services directors. who sort of see the benefits of this, and then things start to happen. I think it's very difficult to make things happen from a bottom-up way, and but once you get directives from the very top, things happen a lot more quickly. And I'm wondering, how can we get that sort of message across to senior, executives in organizations to try to drive this forward? It's I think it's a tough call generally.
Yeah, and a lot of, depending on the company, it can be a very politically and rarefied environment up at the higher echelons. Whenever there's a reorg, there's a window of opportunity to go find something. If find the person who has one or more of these groups and say and sell your case and just say, hey, we could do better if you championed this. Because when there's a reorg, there's already movement. There's freedom, a little bit more space. Again, I'm going to use a soccer analogy here. When you pass the ball to a forward, there's defenders all over them. Well, sometimes you can, when the ball's been there for a while, there's no space. But in that transition, there's space, and that happens in organizations as well. Is that when there's already movement, there's more opportunity.
Yeah, understood. So I think that's all the questions I have, but I don't think that we have any coming in at the moment. But if I can just take control and share my screen for a moment, just like to conclude for the last couple of minutes, and hopefully be able to share my desktop with everyone. Just want to say that I think content sharing is part of content sharing is also having people, processes, its tools as well. We at Stilo do provide some tools to help in this. So there's Migrate, our conversion tool. There's AuthorBridge, which is an authoring tool as well to be used by SMEs. I'd like to thank Amber for her presentation today. I saw this at the conference recently. I thought it was a tremendous presentation and very, very meaningful. We're sort of tuned into this space, and I just thought this really hit the nail on the head with what Amber was saying, and I hope you found the same as well. So please do get in touch with us and with Amber as you feel free, and you can see us as well at a couple of upcoming conferences. We'll be at Lavicon in New Orleans in October, and we'll be at Semester of Europe in Rotterdam in November time. So it'll be good to catch up with you all then. So if you have any further questions, please do get in touch with us. And Amber, thank you once again for a great presentation. So hope to speak to you all again soon. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak, Les. Have a great day.
Thank you.